Hello, friends. Welcome back to English Classes Online. My name is Benjamin. Today's video is on the analysis of Look Back in Anger by John Osborne, West African Senior School Certificate Examination, Literature in English, Preparatory Lesson. Now, having said that, if you are new to this channel, kindly subscribe to this channel by clicking on the subscribe button below. This is a channel where we create and upload videos on weekly basis, videos on literature in English, videos on English language topics, and also videos on content creation and on digital marketing, and also on online business. So this is really a channel where we share ideas with our viewers and subscribers, ideas that will help them either in gaining proficiency in the use of English language, or in equipping them with linguistic tools or literary tools, if you like, that will enable them to score high in their English and literature in English exams. And beyond that, we share ideas about how to start your online business, how to get into content creation, and different digital skills that can enable you to begin to create multiple streams of income for yourself. So having said that, I must urge you to very kindly subscribe to the channel. And if you want to always receive notification whenever a new video is uploaded on this channel, make sure you click on the bell icon as well. So let's dive into the lesson right away by first looking at the agenda. First, we are going to look at the title and its significance. Don't forget, we are analyzing Look Back in Anger by John Osborne. It's a non-African play, and we are going to do justice to it. So the first thing is to look at the title and its significance. Look Back in Anger. How significant is it? Then we look at the setting, and then we have an overview of the play, what the play is really all about. Then we go beyond that and examine characterization. We look at the various characters. And finally, we look at the various themes, all right? We want to take a holistic look at this play. We look at it from different angles so that you will have, a complete overview or full insight into what this play is really about. Now, let's begin with the first item on our agenda for this episode, and that is the title of the play and its significance. The title is Look Back in Anger, and when you look at it in itself, look back in anger. Now, how significant is this title? It is significant as a title of this play in the sense that, the entire play is a depiction of, the extreme anger generated by a man's tendency to focus on the past, instead of living in the present or looking ahead to the future. If you listen to many motivational speakers, they warn people against the habit of living in the past. Probably you had an ugly past, certain bitter things, you had some bitter experiences, certain ugly things that happened in your past, and then you continue to dwell in the past and you allow your ugly past to actually hold you back from doing something with your present life or moving ahead and having a healthy vision of what you can become or what you can achieve in future. Now, the play's protagonist is Jimmy Potter. Jimmy Potter is described as an angry young man, all right? He is angry because he is unable to attain a greater height in life, even though he has achieved university education. Of course, Jimmy belongs to the low-class society, you know, the lower class in the British society. And of course, we are dealing with a period in British history just after the Second World War, precisely in the 1950s. And at this period, Britain is undergoing is experiencing some downturn, you know, moving from being a superpower nation to, you know, playing a second fiddle, because you will appreciate the fact that Britain was once the colonial master of America, but after the Second World War, during that period onwards, America began to emerge as the world superpower, and Britain is now taking a second fiddle. Moreover, in this period of British history, the country is counting her losses from the war, and this affects, you know, the socio-economic life of the people. So this play is actually, you know, highlighting the experiences, especially of the younger generation, and how they respond to this sad situation. Now, we can also see that the play gives us a reflection of the background of the playwright. You know, every writer takes something from their background, from their past experience into their writings. And if you look into John Osborne's autobiography, you will discover that he had an unhappy marriage to an actress called Pamela Lane, and they lived in a cramped accommodation in Derby. So the title, Look Back in Anger, is really significant for these reasons, all right? Now let's move further and look at the setting. Of course, setting in itself, setting refers to two basic things, and I will explain this to you. You know, setting refers to two basic things. All right, so when we talk of setting in literature, number one, setting refers to place, and of course, two, setting refers to time. So the first one, which is place, is what what is referred to in literature as spatial setting, which refers to the geographical or physical location or the place where the actions of the play take place. Then the time aspect is called the temporal setting, which refers to the socio-economic or historical background of, you know, the play. All right, so we are going to look at this from the time and the place perspective. The play Look Back in Anger is set in the England of the 1950s. As I earlier mentioned, it depicts the socioeconomic situation in England shortly after World War II, when the country was counting her losses, all right? But specifically, the play is set in a one-room attic apartment in the Midlands of England. This large room is the home of Jimmy Potter, his wife Alison, and his partner and friend Cliff Lewis, who has a separate bedroom across the hall. Of course, Helen Charles is later to join them in that same apartment. All right, so that is the setting of the play. Now let's now move on and take a look at, have an overview. All right, look back in anger, of course, is a very interesting play written in 1956 by John Osborne. And the play is a kind of love triangle among Jimmy Potter, Alison Potter, and Helen Charles. You might not describe the play as essentially a love triangle, even though it turns out to be so, for the very reason that we have a love relationship between Jimmy Potter and Alison, who are the couple in the first place. But then along the way, we have Helen Charles coming into that apartment, and Helena, as a friend of Alison's, of course, is the one who actually plays a major role in ensuring that Alison leaves Jimmy, you know, who is an abusive partner. And the moment we find that Alison leaves this her partner, Jimmy, then Helena remains in that same apartment, and suddenly and surprisingly, or if you like, dramatically, you know, enters into a relationship with Jimmy, you know, and then they have a love relationship within the period when Alison is away from the family, having gone back to her father's house. All right, so we can, from that perspective, we can describe it as a love triangle. All right, but beyond that, this play actually is basically a play that dramatizes the anger in the mind of the young generation in post-war England at a time when the country is just emerging from the World War and having suffered some, losses. War never really does anyone good. So England experiences a lot of downturn at this time. All right. Then we look at Jimmy Potter, is the protagonist of the play. Is a young, educated, and intelligent man who is unhappy about the happenings in his life and in his society. Of course, he's the angry man that the play is about. Look back in anger. It is Jimmy Potter who looks back in anger, so to say. Now, as we earlier mentioned, he lives in a one-room apartment with his wife, Alison, and his business partner, Cliff Lewis, with whom he runs a candy store in an outdoor market. Well, we already know, as already mentioned, that Jimmy is not happy with his situation. He's not happy with his job because he believes he deserves more. He is a hot-tempered person, and he always expresses his anger about many issues and many happenings around him. Sadly, he often vents his anger and frustration on his wife, Alison. Now, we have to understand that this is a typo here. Alison has double L. It's written with a single L here. So take note of that. Now, Jimmy is in the habit of insulting his wife. That's one thing we find out in the play, you see. And we discover that Helena Charles, who visits the family, you know, eventually prompts Alison to leave Jimmy. But after Alison leaves, Jimmy decides to confront Helena, but that doesn't really last, you know, because very soon we find Jimmy and Helena begin to live together as a couple, and we find them in intimate relationship. All right. So the situation changes, however, when Alison returns to Jimmy after suffering a miscarriage. At this juncture, Helena reconciles with Alison. Obviously, Helena is feeling guilty, having betrayed her friend. Of course, it's really not morally right for her to have done that. So Helena decides to leave and allow Alison and Jimmy to come back together. And we discover that the two try to live as a couple once again. In other words, they mend fences and begin to live as a family, as a couple once again. Now, let's look at characterization. Now, characterization is really the way in which a playwright, because we are discussing a play now, of course, you can talk about characterization even when analyzing a novel or even a poem, a narrative poem, if you like. But here we are dealing with a play. So characterization in a play is the way in which the playwright creates the characters and assigns roles to them. All right. So characterization is about, the way the characters are created, the way they are presented, the kinds of roles that the characters are made to play. All right. So, and you know that characters are the agents that carry out the actions in a play, or that are involved in the incidents and take part in the events of the play. Now we have a number of characters in Osborne's Look Back in Anger. We are not going to, just going to have a sketchy look at these characters one by one, and I will just tell you a few things about each of these characters, but I would like you to later look forward to a complete video I will upload mainly on characterization. You can analyze a play either from the perspective of characterization or thematization, or even from other angles such as, dramatic techniques. All right. So, but here we are taking a holistic look at the entire play. Now, the first character here is Jimmy Potter, and you need to understand that Jimmy Potter is actually the protagonist, is the main character. Arguably, you might say he's the hero of the play. All right. Jimmy Potter comes from a very poor background, from a lower class. He's a working class person, all right? And he owns a candy shop or a sweets shop together with his friend Cliff Lewis. They share an apartment together as well, as earlier mentioned. And then we find that Jimmy is described as a tall, thin young man, about 25 years. So he's a young man. And of course, we find him wearing a worn jacket and flannels. And that actually gives us a picture of his poor background, all right, and his low class. Because in the British society, you find the upper class, you find the middle class, and you find the lower class. And of course, when we examine the themes, you will understand that there is class conflict also portrayed in this play. So Jimmy is actually the husband of Alison, and they share an apartment with Jimmy's friend, who is Cliff. And of course, we find Jimmy an angry person, and he is the most talkative of all. He is rude, and of course, we find him exhibiting his character. His relationship with Alison can be described as an abusive relationship, and the abuser is Jimmy. Potter. All right. So we can also describe Jimmy as a misogynist. All right. Well, let me try to write this down. A misogynist. All right. All right. A misogynist, of course, is guilty of what we call misogyny. You know, is one of the themes where we are going to misogynist. A misogynist, of course, is somebody who is, misogynist is actually someone who is, who hates women, if you like, you know, or who maltreats women, or who treats women as a second-class citizen or a subhuman, you know. So we are going to talk more about misogyny as a theme, but we can describe Jimmy Potter as a misogynist. We will explain that when we talk about it in the themes. All right. All right. So now the next character is Cliff Lewis, and Cliff Lewis is Jimmy's friend. All right. Of course, Jimmy says that Cliff is the only friend of his that is still around, and Jimmy has a friend who is Haw, but Haw has left for China, and you know, Jimmy only has Cliff as the only friend who is still around. Now we find Cliff as the opposite of Jimmy in character, because here we find the only area in which we can find resemblance is in their low background, because whereas Jimmy is educated, Cliff doesn't have the luxury of being educated. All right. And he comes from a lower background, and but Cliff, unlike Jimmy, is relaxed. Cliff is relaxed. Is not a hot-tempered person. Is somebody who can be seen as a self-made or self-developed individual. He didn't have the luxury of having school education, yet we can see him even more decent than Jimmy in terms of behavior, because he is better behaved in terms of his conduct in the play. So we can see Cliff as the foil of Jimmy in the play, you know, because Jimmy, he always vents his anger on people, and he turns his best friends into his worst enemies by the way he behaves. Unlike Cliff, who actually values his relationship with people, he treats Alison with decency, unlike Jimmy. All right, so that is so much about Cliff Lewis. And when the play opens, we find him, you know, reading Sunday newspapers with Jimmy. And when Jimmy, as usual, goes into his fury, into his angry outburst, we find that Cliff is the one really trying to pacify him. Then the next character here is Alison, Alison Potter. All right, Alison Potter is Jimmy's wife. All right. Okay, so we are through with this. Let me mark them. We are through with Jimmy Potter, and we are through with Cliff Lewis. Now we are examining Alison Potter, and Alison Potter is Jimmy's wife, and she is portrayed physically we find her description, the way she's portrayed, she's depicted, wearing, when the play opens, we see her, pressing clothes at the ironing board. And that is the indication that, she has a job in the play. All right. Well, she's pictured here as in the tradition of upper class Victorian woman. She of course comes from the upper class background. Her husband is Colonel Redfern. All right, that is Alison's father. So she comes from that class, and actually that also places her from the opposite background to that of Jimmy. Jimmy comes from a poor background. Alison comes from a rich upper class background. And it's not surprising that she's wearing an expensive skirt, all right? That is in the stage direction. She's portrayed as wearing a grubby but expensive skirt. The skirt is expensive, which shows that she's coming from a rich background. But the skirt is grubby in the sense that we find a mixture of her rich background now being distorted by her marriage to someone from a poor background. So she's a character from a rich background, the upper class, and now mingling, all right, with a guy from a poor background, and she's having a taste of what poverty looks like. All right, so her upper middle class status has already, been distorted by her relationship with the working class guy, Jimmy, all right? And also their relationship with Cliff. And we see here that Alison is somebody who is unlike Jimmy. She doesn't exhibit anger. She is calm and calculated, and this actually annoys Jimmy. In fact, Jimmy sees this aspect of Alison's character as something that reminds him of the character of those people up there who don't know what the people in the middle or lower class people are feel. So they are just calm, all right? Nothing touches them. And, this actually doesn't, is something that Jimmy doesn't find funny. It makes him angry. And he also finds that Alison doesn't respond emotionally, even in their intimate moments as husband and wife. And this pisses him off and makes him angry. All right. So when we begin to handle the themes, you will discover that Jimmy is venting her anger on Alison, his wife, not necessarily from a personal perspective, but because he is already angry with anything that reminds him of the upper class. So it's a class conflict, all right? Then the next character we want to look at is Helen Charles. And this is Alison's friend who comes to stay with her. And one thing with Helen Charles is that she is also coming from the upper class, so she's an actress, all right? Is an entertainer, an actress. And of course, she just comes in to stay with her friend Alison. And ironically, she's the one who actually who compels Alison to leave Jimmy because of the abuses from Jimmy. All right. So, but as it turns out, when Alison leaves Jimmy, Helena stays behind and enters into a romantic relationship with Jimmy. And of course, that is one particular thing that actually happens. And we find infidelity and we find betrayal. Betrayal on the part of Alison, because this is someone who advises her friend to leave this relationship because the guy is an abuser. But the moment she leaves this relationship, this same lady takes over, the position of the friend and goes into a relationship with Jimmy. All right. So that actually, then we find one aspect of Helena Charles's character. She comes in first with the character of a feminist. Of course, you can see that in her discussion with Alison. She gets uncomfortable with, being abused by a man. And so she makes it clear that she cannot take it, and she wants her friend to pack her bag and baggage and leave such an abuser. That presents her to us as a feminist. But there is a dramatic change in that character, because when Helena now enters into a romantic relationship with Jimmy, then she soft pedals, and we don't find that extremist feminist stance that she starts with. All right, so that is one thing we find here. And so unlike her initial attitude, which also is what she uses to compel her friend to leave this relationship, she at last, relaxes in her relationship with Jimmy, which gives the impression that, she can accommodate Jimmy's abuses, which of course she tried to compel her friends not to do. In all, we find the character of Helena Charles as a portrayal of what one can see as a kind of compromise between feminist views and, being able to find, being able to stay in a relationship, in spite of your feminist stance, So Helena Charles is giving us the impression that even though you are a feminist, you have to accommodate your spouse's flaws, try to work on it instead of, trying to break the relationship. All right, so then the next, of course, this is so much about Helena Charles, Alison's friend. Then one thing also good, even though in entering into a relationship with Jimmy, whom she advised her friend Alison to leave on account of his abuses, in that her action, we see her as having betrayed her friend. So she's morally a culprit in that aspect. However, when Alison returns into that relationship with Jimmy, then we see the positive side of Alison. Having felt guilty for betraying her friend, she now reconciles with her friends and she behaves in a way that shows she has repented, if you like. She decides to quit her relationship with Jimmy because she realizes that it is wrong in the first place. She ought not to have, taken the place of her friend, that is chasing her friend away from her matrimonial home and taking her position. So her action at last shows that she changes morally. and she leaves her relationship. She walks out of that relationship with Jimmy because it is wrong in the first place morally. And then that paves the way for her friend Alison to return to her relationship with her husband, Jimmy. And at last, I think we see a kind of resolution at the end of that. That is what we call denouement, resolution of a conflict at the end of the play. All right. Now, so that in that we give that as a kind of pass mark to Helena Charles in her later behavior, her later conduct. All right. Then looking at Colonel Redfern, Alison's father, of course, the only appearance this man makes in the play is when he comes to, take his daughter. All right, he arrives at Jimmy's apartment to take Alison back to his house after her marriage with Jimmy hit the rock. But we see that Colonel Redfern is a retired military officer in the English upper middle class, having served the British government in colonial India. All right, so he's one person who seems to dwell in the past. He has been a military officer in the British government that has occupied the position of the world superpower and also the colonial master. But at the point when this play is being written, of course, we are looking at a different era in British history. At this point in time, Britain is coming out from the Second World War and is losing her position as the world superpower to her former colonial, her former colony, America. Historically, America was colonized by the British, but at this point in time, America is becoming the superpower, taking over this position from the former colonial master. All right. So, and Redfern, having lived in the period when Britain enjoyed its heights in terms of political power and in terms of a stable and very robust economy. Now, we are getting into an age or an era when things have fallen apart or are beginning to fall apart in the British history. And so we find this man looking back in retrospect and remembering the good old days, so to say. All right. So that's the character of Colonel Redfern. All right. Then, apart from these characters, we have some other characters, minor characters that we can describe as ghost characters. Now, a ghost character is a character we find in a play or a story who doesn't make direct appearance, who doesn't take part in the actions, doesn't say anything, doesn't speak, but we come to know about them from what other characters have said about them. And one of them is Jimmy's father. Of course, we find that Jimmy's father here is actually a character who is mentioned at the time Jimmy is having a conversation with Helena Charles. And, Jimmy is is narrating his experience. His father fought in the Spanish Civil War, all right, and was seriously wounded. And so Jimmy has that sad memory of his father. When after he was wounded, he was abandoned by his friends, and associates, and he was alone, and he was suffering alone, and nobody was with him except Jimmy. And Jimmy was just a tender, at the age of 10. At the time, he has to witness his father's suffering and eventual death. All right. So it's one of the things actually that has shaped his life and has actually contributed to his character as an angry young man who has to look back in anger. And of course, all these, all these things from his background have actually contributed to the way he behaves, And of course, the playwright is giving us insight into character development. You find people from a very poor background, not necessarily poor background, from a violent background or an abused background, we find them taking something from that background into their present character. And that is what we find in the character of Jimmy Potter. All right. Then the next character is Brother Nigel, and this is Alison's father. Of course, incidentally, is one of the targets of Jimmy's abuses and scorn. Don't forget that Jimmy, abuses, he takes pleasure in abusing not only his wife, Alison, but even members of Alison's family. All right. And one of the targets of his abuses is Alison's brother, who is known as Brother Nigel. All right. So now Brother Nigel is he has the hope he hopes to become a politician. After his training in Sandhurst Academy, which is a military school, and Jimmy actually abuses Brother Nigel. He says that Brother Nigel has a very vague, knowledge of what life is all about, and that in fact Nigel deserves to have to be awarded a degree in vagary. So these are some of the ways in which Jimmy Potter abuses some of Alison's members of Alison's family. And one of them is Brother Nigel. Jimmy regards Nigel as a sellout, all right? Even though he's a patriotic Englishman, yet he sees him. In fact, anything that is that resembles the upper class for Jimmy is an object for ridicule, all right? Then the next, of course, we have now looked at the character of Jimmy's father, all right? So we have also looked at Brother Nigel. Now let's look at Hor Tanner. Hor Tanner happens to be a very good friend of Jimmy, but now Hor has gone abroad, precisely has gone to China, where he hopes to become a writer. And so Jimmy and Hor had a good time when they lived together. But one thing about Hor is that he is a friend who has actually accommodated Jimmy and Alison. At the time, they could not afford a place of their own. All right. So, and of course, quite typical of Jimmy. Jimmy doesn't spare her either. He accuses her of not being patriotic enough to stay in England and face the difficult situation in the country after the war. All right. So he also not happy with her for abandoning his mother, his poor old mother. All right. So that is exactly what we know about her. Of course, we are also going to look at Hall's mother. That's the next character here. Incidentally, Hall's mother happened to be one person that Jimmy likes, and for selfish reasons. One, Hall's mother has been of help to Jimmy, you know, in the setting up of the sweet stall. And another reason why Jimmy likes Hall's mother is that Jimmy loves his wife, Alison. And it's one of the things actually Jimmy accuses his wife of. He accuses his wife, Alison, of not reciprocating Hall's mother's, or that is Mrs. Tanner's, love to her. All right. So then we find that when Jimmy receives the news that Hall's mother had a stroke, he immediately travels, he takes the next train to London in order to see her. All right. And when Jimmy comes back, we get the report that Mrs. Tanner has died and is going to be buried. So that also is another person whom Jimmy happens to witness her demise, He witnesses her passing on, all right, just as he witnesses the passing away of his father. So Jimmy is really somebody who is, who is familiar with suffering and pain, all right? Then we look at Mrs. Redfern, and that is the wife of Colonel Redfern, who happens to be Alison's father. So Mrs. Redfern is Alison's mother, and of course is one of the persons that that Jimmy doesn't really like. Is somebody he loves to hate and whom he hates passionately. And most of the time when Jimmy is castigating the upper class, or when he decides to insult or lash out at his wife Alison, he directs most of his outbursts to Mrs. Redfern. That's Alison's mother. All right. And one of the reasons why Jimmy naturally hates Alison's mother is that Alison's mother is one person who really was opposed to the marriage between Alison and Jimmy. And of course, Jimmy also attributes that to the kind of character that he doesn't like in people from the upper class, because Alison's mother is opposed to that marriage because Jimmy is from the lower class, all right? And then Alison's mother goes to the extent of even hiring a private detective, or private detectives to monitor Jimmy and try to find out something in her background, in his background, which she can use as an excuse to say, look, my daughter is not going to marry somebody like this, all right? So something to indict Jimmy. So you can also see why Jimmy is actually angry, all right? So Mrs. Redfern is somebody who actually opposed the marriage between Jimmy and Alison very vehemently. And we can see exactly that, Mrs. Redfern goes ahead to write letters to Alison, all right? And Jimmy gets to know about this when he searches Alison's bag in her absence, all right? And this makes Jimmy angry, more angry with Alison's mother, because in those letters, there's nothing that there's no reference that Alison's mother makes to Jimmy, you know, so which means Jimmy finds out that this woman doesn't see anything important about him. It's all about her daughter. And so that is exactly what we find there. There are another character called Madeline. Of course, Madeline is an older, let me just mention her here. Madeline, all right? Madeline is an older woman that Jimmy has been in love with, you know, and he talks about her from time to time, all right? It seems that he had a kind of good relationship with Madeline, probably because Madeline also comes from, doesn't really seem to come from a very, very rich background. So they seem to be compatible, all right? But in that case, we see Madeline as a kind of mentor to Jimmy, all right? So that is the kind of relationship. Then the last character is of course, the character that is Miss Drury. Let me just mention her. Miss Drury happens to be Alison's landlady. You know, she doesn't appear in the play, and we don't find her saying anything directly in the play, but we hear about her when Cliff is talking about her complaints concerning their apartment not being kept clean, all right? And of course, we also find that Alison is afraid that, you know, Jimmy's angry outbursts might, you know, get to that woman and she might give them a quick notice or something like that. So these are the characters in this particular play. I hope giving you, you know, insight into these characters will help you to have a you know, a clearer picture of what this play is about. Now, let's now go ahead and look at the themes, you know. Now, what is a theme? All right, a theme, let me give you, well, let me not waste our time by trying to type it, but let me give you a description or a definition of what a theme is about. You know, a theme is a major idea or a main idea expressed in a work of art. Now, if you have read a play or a novel or a poem and someone asks you the question, what is this play all about? You are likely to begin to tell them the themes, to discuss the themes. A theme is basically what the play is all about, or one of the things that the play is about, all right? So that is what a theme is about. And then we have a number of themes. Let's begin with the first of them, which is marginalization and frustration. We find that this is really what Look Back in Anger is about. We find Jimmy Potter expressing his anger about the situation in a society where he feels marginalized. When you are marginalized, it means you are not given the chance to get involved in the affairs of that society. All right, so Jimmy Potter feels that he's deprived of the opportunity to play any meaningful role. He feels that he deserves more from the society, having graduated from a university, you know, but he cannot get what he deserves because the best opportunities have been reserved for the children from the upper class, people who have family connections or who are connected to people in power and those who could afford to enter the right schools, you know. So that is exactly the kind of situation that uh, John Osborne is portraying in this play, Look Back in Anger. You know, one of the things that Jimmy Potter hates about the upper class, or what you can call the establishment, is their unwillingness to show or feel strong emotions. It is one of the things that Jimmy dislikes about his wife, Alison, who actually comes from an upper class family. Now we find that Alison is not compatible with him, is not on the same page with Jimmy. Jimmy has strong emotions of anger against the society. He doesn't mince words about it, but he doesn't find his wife seeing eye to eye with him in such issues. You know, Alison tends to just keep her cool and doesn't show any strong emotions about anything. And, you know, even when they are having intimate relationship, intimate moments as a couple, you know, Jimmy doesn't find Alison, you know, a very, very emotionally powerful person. He's somebody who is reserved, and this is the kind of character, you know, that Jimmy detects in the upper class. They are just too cool for his liking. They are not perturbed. They look unperturbed. They are not like the hustlers in the society. All right. So, but when we look at the theme of marginalization and frustration, then we look at Jimmy Potter as a marginalized and frustrated young man who is angry and who vents his anger on his wife. Now, the next theme is class conflict. There is a conflict between the upper class and the middle class in England. All right, this is portrayed in the play. And Jimmy Potter belongs to the middle, or if you like, the lower class, the people we can describe as the less privileged workers, the working class people. But his wife, Alison, comes from an upper class family. So we find Jimmy venting his anger on a member of the upper class, which his wife belongs to. And so the wife becomes the victim of the abuse, all right? Jimmy represents the underprivileged, underemployed, if you like, British youth who are frustrated with the situation in the country. So when Jimmy lashes out at his wife, he's not only venting his anger or frustration on her as a person, but he is also taking a revenge on the upper middle class, which he represents and which he hates, and which his wife Alison represents. Now, Jimmy wants Alison to see eye to eye with him on those issues that he feels so passionately about. You know, in other words, he wants her to denounce her upper class background. Jimmy often directs his harsh attacks against Alison's mother, who represents the upper middle class. You know, when we were, you know, examining the characters, I did mention that Alison's mother is, you know, happened to have opposed the marriage between Alison and Jimmy. She opposed it because Jimmy comes from a poor background, and like every other mother from an upper class family, she wants her daughter to get married to somebody also from the upper class. All right. So because of this, Jimmy sees Alison's mother as the real culprit, you know, the person who actually represents the upper middle class, whom he is angry with. All right. Then eventually, when Helen Charles, Alison's friend, also comes into the apartment, and of course, she also receives some of these attacks from Jimmy, because she also happens to come from the upper class. Although, ironically, we find Helena trying to accommodate these abuses and they are having a romantic relationship. So in other words, we find Jimmy expressing his anger at marginalization, deprivation, and limitations which he believes are imposed on him by the upper class. So there is a class conflict. Some people call it class war. Some call it class consciousness, you know. Jimmy is conscious of his belonging to a lower class, you know, and that are treated badly, oppressed by the upper class, all right? So, and if you read Karl Marx's theory, you will discover that there is always this class conflict in every society, basically between the capitalist and the labor, the laboring class. All right. Now let's look at the third theme, and that is frustration and anger versus self-satisfaction. Again, it's another way of looking at the class conflict, but we are looking at it from a different angle. Here we find two groups of people. One class of people are frustrated and angry. Then we find the other class well relaxed, all right? And when I discussed the themes of Caged Bird by Maya Angelou, we also talked about this, you know, freedom versus, you know, let's say confinement and oppression, if you like, versus freedom. You find a kind of irony, two classes of people, all right? So, but in this play, what do we find? You know, John Osborne uses this play to paint a picture of the frustration and anger that characterize the lower class, you know, in the British society, in contrast to the self-satisfaction, the easy life enjoyed by the upper class. Now, Jimmy Potter believes that he and other members of the lower class are more in touch with the realities of life than members of the upper class who are so complacent, you know, easygoing. You know, they are so much, they find it so much easy in their life that they lose the real human feelings. They don't understand what the average man in the streets is passing through. All right. So that exactly can be found in various other societies. In the third world, you know, in the third world countries, we find it even more pronounced. A few privileged people who belong to the upper class, you know, who have probably taken over the wealth of the nation, are living a luxurious life there, living ostentatiously, you know, easygoing. They can take their children to schools in very advanced countries. You know, they go to hospitals in advanced countries, and they leave the struggling masses behind in their own country. The people who have to contend with the realities of banditry, the realities of poverty, the realities, you know, of inflation, the realities of, you know, everyday robbery going on and suffering in the hands of criminals and bandits, and also suffering deprivation because even their take-home pay cannot take them home. You know, their pay at the end of the month cannot even buy the food that will be enough for their family. All right. So as a struggling worker, you know, Jimmy Potter tends to see suffering and anger as a part of his identity. That is what he has grown up knowing. On one occasion, Alison herself admits that you can't take his suffering away from him. You know, otherwise he will be lost without it. So he is identified with this kind of life. And you find it in various countries. There are people who are just, you know, suffering and pain have become part and parcel, of their everyday life. That is just who they are. And they don't know the life of luxury that people in the upper class actually enjoy. So you can't get this kind of person to become really happy, you know, and start clapping for people in the upper class whom he perceived are the people who have actually placed him in this impoverished situation. So we find frustration and anger versus self-satisfaction as a theme that highlights the ironies of life in this play. All right. Then another theme is the loss of childhood, or a lost childhood, if you like. Now, this theme is evident in the way Jimmy Potter's childhood experience is highlighted. For example, we find that Jimmy's father, you know, who fought in a Spanish Civil War, got seriously wounded, and having been abandoned by his friends and associates, is left only with his son, Jimmy, at the age of 10. And Jimmy has to witness this painful demise of his father battling with his 6-month physical and psychological pain of, having to nurse his injuries until he dies. All right. So in this way, John Osborne shows how Jimmy has had to deal with suffering from a tender age. From being a child, he has witnessed this kind of suffering. So, and if we also look at the life of Alison, Jimmy's wife, by virtue of her marriage to Jimmy, she also experiences a lost childhood because she marries Jimmy in her youthful age, and her youth is wasted in the anger and abuse meted out to her by an angry and abusive husband. All right, so we find the loss of childhood also a theme that is dominant in this play. The next theme we want to discuss here is post-war dilemma and disappointment in the young generation. There's a kind of post-war dilemma, and there's a kind of disappointment that the younger generation in England, feels, because of the situation in which they find themselves. So the play portrays the post-war situation that gave rise to the angry young men movement in British theater. Look Back in Anger is about the sad situation that faced the younger generation of that period and how disappointed they were with the British society. In the play, we find Jimmy Potter, a working class young man, complaining bitterly about the situation in the British society of that post-war period. According to him, there aren't any good, brave causes left in the Britain of the 1950s. So in the aftermath of the Second World War, we find a society in England that is actually experiencing some hard times, all right? And especially the younger generation who are not enjoying the good old days that actually that the country experienced before that period, all right? So there is disappointment in what is happening, especially among the youths. They are disappointed with their government. They are disappointed with their society because they don't find things rosy anymore, all right? Then the next theme is the theme of love and betrayal. Obviously, we look at the marriage between Jimmy and Alison. And of course, like every other marriage, of course, love plays parts, because Jimmy professes love to Alison in the first place. He asked Alison to marry him because he believed that Alison made him forget his bitter past, the type of bitterness he nursed in connection with his father's 6-month struggle with death. He believes that Alison, his relationship with Alison has made him forget all that. However, he ends up not treating Alison with the kind of love and fondness expected of a loving spouse. What we find instead is that Jimmy subjects Alison to all kinds of verbal abuse, all right, owing to his angry feeling. He feels angry all the time, and Alison becomes pregnant with Jimmy's child that has to leave for her father's house owing to Jimmy's abuses. So we find love between them, you know, which brings them into marriage. Then we find that this love is interrupted by this young man's feeling of anger. So after Alison leaves, Jimmy and Alison's friend Helena start living together as a couple. So we find a kind of betrayal here. So we find that Alison is betrayed not only by her husband Jimmy, but also by her friend Helena. Don't forget that Helena visits this apartment because of her friend Alison. And of course, it is because Helena feels bad about the experience of her friend Alison, how she suffered abuses from Jimmy, that she actually contributes to making her leave that relationship. Yet the same Alison turns around 360 degrees to enter into a relationship with the same abuser that she advised her friends to walk away from. And so that is exactly what happened. So we find love and betrayal. And of course, that makes what we call a love triangle. You know, there is love between Jimmy, Potter, and Alison. And then suddenly a betrayal takes place, and then there is love between Jimmy and Helena Charles. And that kind of love actually happens only because there is a betrayal that has taken place, because it is not a morally normal thing that you visit your friend and then you spend some time with them. You advise your friend to walk away from a relationship because the partner is an abuser. And then the moment she walks away from that relationship, you take her place and fall in love with her partner. And of course, that happens because there is a betrayal. However, towards the end of the play, Alison comes back after having a miscarriage, and she and Jimmy reconcile and begin to live together as a couple once again. And before that happens again, by way of resolving this conflict that has actually generated suspense in the play, we find that Helena and Alison also reconcile. Obviously, Helena, who has felt guilty for having broken that, having betrayed her friend's trust, of course, you know, walks away from that abnormal relationship she has, you know, started with Jimmy, thereby paving the way for her friend to return to her matrimonial home. So we have witnessed love and betrayal, and it is part of what happens in the society. So it is a dominant theme in this play. Now, the next theme is the theme of marriage and the abuse of marriage. There's no doubt that this is really a very prominent theme in the marriage, because in the play, because the play is about this couple, is about Jimmy Potter, and it is about Alison Potter, and it is about what happens in their marriage. Marriage is a universal concept, all right? And marriage is a recognized institution. And what a theme is in literature is that a theme is a universal idea. It is a lesson about life which everyone can relate with. Everyone obviously comes from one kind of relationship or the other, which of course in most cases is marriage. All right, so in this play, we find a picture of how marriage is abused by those who don't understand its real purpose. Jimmy and Alison begin a marriage based upon love. There's no doubt about it. However, Jimmy cultivates the ugly habit of venting his anger on his wife, subjecting her to all kinds of verbal abuses. So we see a marriage being abused as it is being done in different places. He is part of the society. Is one of the social problems that are, trending in various societies. Now, Jimmy's anger eventually compels Alison to leave him while carrying their unborn child. All right. Alison later suffers miscarriage. So it's the kind of thing that some women suffer when they experience an abused marriage. It is always the woman who suffers, and a man doesn't carry a child. It is the woman who carries the child. So in most cases, the woman is the victim when there is an abused marriage. There is no doubt that some men fall victim as well, but predominantly it is women who suffer in this situation. So no sooner had Alison left that marriage than Jimmy goes into a relationship with Alison's friend Helena. And Jimmy doesn't treat his marriage with Alison with any form of respect. All right. So we find that when his wife is at home, she is the target of his abuses. And the moment the wife leaves, she is treated with infidelity. So to Jimmy, Alison has gone, and Helena is another woman who is now available for him to caress. That is the kind of abuse you find in different marriages. So we find Jimmy a character who can no longer differentiate right from wrong because of his anger and frustration. You find many guys who are really frustrated in their personal life, and they bring this into their marriage, and the woman becomes the victim in a situation like this. So we find that the marriage between Jimmy and Alison is a disastrous and abusive marriage, all right? And like a notable scholar says, when the purpose of something is not known, abuse becomes inevitable. And this plays out in many marriages, even right now as we speak, because many spouses don't even understand the purpose of the marriage they have entered into in the first place. And because they don't understand that marriage is for companionship, it has to be a partnership based on mutual love and respect. And because they don't understand the purpose of marriage, what they do is to abuse the marriage. All right? So marriage and the abuse of marriage is a very dominant theme in Look Back in Anger by John Osborne. Now, the last but not the least theme we want to look at here is misogyny. Now, what is misogyny? Well, you can describe it as hatred for or contempt for women or girls. Some men just have a wrong picture of who women or girls are, because, they treat women as lesser human beings, all right? And the society has also this very erroneous impression of women as lesser beings, all right? So, and that is why women are kept at a lower status than men in most societies. So it is something that is a social problem. And this social problem is depicted in the play through Jimmy Potter's abusive treatment of his wife, Alison. So we find that although Jimmy and Alison come together as a couple, the relationship between them is a very abusive one. Why? It is essentially because Jimmy sees the wife as inferior to him. If he sees the wife as an equal partner, do you think he would abuse her at every moment? or insult her even in the presence of other people. He wouldn't do so, but because he has this wrong picture of who the wife is in his head, he sees a lesser human being, somebody probably who is just a piece of furniture in the house. So he decides to treat her and talk to her the way he likes. So in this play, we find Jimmy treating the wife anyhow, subjecting her to verbal abuse. He lashes out at her on a regular basis. And what happens at last when Alison leaves on account of those abuses? Jimmy enters into a relationship with Alison's friend Helena. And he also subjects Helena to similar abuses, even though he seems to be softer to Helena. Well, this is not surprising because we find it also with most men, all right? They can treat a girl or a woman a bit with softness at the time they are having they are not yet married, all right? At the time they are just getting to know each other and then initiating a romantic relationship. You see the man trying to treat the woman with some respect. But the moment the woman comes into his house as his wife, then his attitude changes, because then he now sees the woman as a property I have brought into the house, is my own. And that is where misogyny takes the center stage. Now, so from the relationship, the kind of awkward relationship we find between Jimmy and Alison, then we find a picture of Jimmy Potter as a misogynist. A misogynist is basically a sexist. You know, he believes that one sex or gender, in this case, the male gender, is superior to the other. This obviously explains why he treats his wife with total disrespect and does the same thing to any other woman he comes across. He has no respect for his female partner because he and he alone is all that matters in the relationship. This is what misogyny is about, and it is a condemnable social problem. And of course, it doesn't all go well for the marriage institution. It doesn't all go well for the family as the most important segment of society. Because when you find the husband as a misogynist, what happens is the kind of abuse we find in the relationship between Jimmy Potter and Alison. So, and this is where we are going to draw the curtain in today's episode. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. This analysis of Look Back in Anger by John Osborne has been a very passionate one. It's one that I have really been excited to discuss, and I'm happy I've been able to do that. I hope you enjoyed it too, and if you did, kindly subscribe to the this channel if you have not done so, and then share the video, like the video, and share it with your friends and relations. If there's any friend of yours or a relative who is going to sit any of the literature exams in which John Osborne's Look Back in Anger is a text, of course, you need to do the person a favor by sharing this video with them. If you have also benefited from this video and you have any suggestions or any comments of commendation or any questions, please leave them in the comments section below. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Don't forget to click on the bell icon so that when the next video goes live on this channel, you'll be instantly notified. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye-bye for now and remain blessed. Many thanks for watching today's video.
a big thank you to all of you out there for being part of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, kindly subscribe to this channel. Subscribe now as a way of giving us support. For notification about new videos, click on the bell icon. You will find the bell icon. Click on it so that whenever a new video is uploaded, you will be instantly notified. If you have actually enjoyed the video, like and share the video with your friends and relatives. This is very important. If you have any comments, leave your comments below. Any questions, any suggestions, we would gladly receive them and respond promptly and positively to them. See you in the next video. I look forward to always seeing you.